German prisoners taken in France in the summer of 1944 said a lot of things when they were interrogated. They talked about the infantry, the tanks, the air power. But the thing American artillery historians kept noting, across interrogation after interrogation, unit after unit, was how often the prisoners separated out the artillery. The infantry was manageable. The tanks were difficult. The artillery was something else entirely. American artillery in the Second World War was not simply a supporting arm. It was, in the assessment of most senior commanders on both sides, the single most decisive weapon system the United States brought to the field. What made it different wasn't any single gun. It was what happened when American industry, American doctrine, and a generation of officers trained at Fort Sill sent those guns into a war that Germany didn't fully understand they were entering. These are the 10 pieces that taught the lesson. Number 10. The M2A1 105mm howitzer. Start with the workhorse, because without it, nothing else on this list means what it means. The M2A1 was the standard American field howitzer, 105mm, firing a 33-pound shell to nearly 7 miles, with a sustained rate of 3 rounds per minute and higher bursts from a well-drilled crew. More than 8,500 were built during the war. It equipped the artillery battalions of virtually every American infantry division in every theater. The German 10.5cm Leife 18 was a comparable weapon by technical measures. Neither gun dramatically outclassed the other. What separated them was everything around the M2A1. The fire direction system, the communications net that put shells on target in under 3 minutes from a forward observer's call, the ammunition supply chain that kept it fed at rates German batteries couldn't match. The M2A1 wasn't the most powerful gun the Americans fielded. It was the gun that was everywhere, always, and never ran dry. Number 9. The 155mm M1 Long Tom. The Long Tom was what happened when the Americans decided that range mattered and compromise didn't. The M1 fired a 95-pound shell to nearly 14 miles, more than twice the reach of the standard 105mm. It weighed 12 tons, required a 12-man crew, and took time to move and establish. But once the Long Tom was set and speaking, it could reach command posts, supply routes, and reserve positions that no German commander had considered threatened. German doctrine cited its rear assets at distances calibrated against expected threats. The Long Tom exceeded those distances. After the breakout from Normandy, American Long Toms were hitting targets the men at those targets believed themselves safe from. The psychological effect on rear area troops, men not accustomed to incoming fire, working at supply depots and repair yards that had never needed defensive positions, was documented in prisoner interrogations throughout 1944. The Long Tom remained in service through Korea and Vietnam. The gun the Wehrmacht learned to fear in France was still fighting 40 years later. Number 8. The M7 Priest. The problem with field artillery in an armored war is straightforward. Tanks move faster than guns. A towed howitzer battery provides excellent fire support until the armor outruns it. The M7 Priest solved that by putting a 105mm howitzer on a Sherman tank chassis. Over 4,300 were built. Each could travel at 26 miles per hour on a road, cross the same terrain as the tanks, and deliver the same fire support whether the front had moved 2 miles or 20. British crews who received M7s through Lend-Lease named it for the pulpit-like machine gun ring on the superstructure. It made its combat debut at El Alamein in October 1942 and was still firing in support of armored operations on VE Day. German panzer commanders understood combined arms. What they faced in American armored divisions was combined arms that kept pace with the armor, a 105mm howitzer arriving at the objective at the same time as the tanks, not hours later when the road cleared for the towed guns to follow. Number 7. The M12 Gun Motor Carriage. Most Americans have never heard of the M12. The German defenders of the Siegfried Line had reason to remember it. The M12 was a 155mm rifle, not a howitzer, a gun, mounted on a tank chassis, capable of direct fire against fortifications at ranges where the crew could see exactly what they were shooting at. Muzzle velocity was around 2,400 feet per second. At direct fire range against concrete, the M12 didn't suppress the position, it removed it. In the fall of 1944, reaching the fixed fortifications of the Siegfried Line, conventional indirect fire could neutralize defenders, but couldn't destroy the structures themselves. Crews moved M12s to within a few hundred yards and fired point blank. The M7 Priest would walk a crew out of a bunker. The M12 ended the conversation about the bunker entirely. 100 were built, 74 were overhauled and sent to Northwest Europe for combat. They were used almost exclusively for siege work. They were very good at it. Number 6. The 4.2-inch chemical mortar. The 4.2-inch mortar entered the war as a chemical weapons delivery system and ended it as something American infantry valued more than almost any other close fire support asset they had. The chemical mission was almost never used, but the mortar itself was exceptional. A rifled tube that fired an 11-pound shell to over 4,000 yards with accuracy smoothbore mortars of the same caliber couldn't approach. That rifling gave it spin stabilization, and the precision that followed let company commanders put high explosive or white phosphorus onto a machine gun nest at a mile's distance, reliably, on short notice. Its accuracy made it unusually responsive for a weapon of its type. Chemical mortar battalions, separate units attached to infantry divisions and regiments as needed, put the 4.2 where the fighting was, giving frontline commanders responsive close support without always waiting on divisional artillery to free up assets. When a rifle company needed fire on a position 2,000 yards out, the attached 4.2 battalion was often the fastest answer available. German infantry, supported by conventional mortars, understood what incoming mortar fire sounded and felt like. The 4.2's rifled accuracy made it something harder to calibrate against, fire that landed with the consistency of a registered gun, from a tube a crew could carry and set up in minutes. There was no clean line between where the mortars ended and the artillery began, and that ambiguity cost time that German defenders didn't always have. Number 5. The M1 8-inch howitzer. American doctrine recognized a problem most armies preferred not to acknowledge. Artillery that suppresses isn't the same as artillery that destroys. The 105mm and the 155mm could suppress a determined defender in a fortified position. The 8-inch could put him in the ground. The M1 fired a 200-pound shell to about 10.5 miles with accuracy that heavy artillery of its era had no business achieving. It rapidly earned a reputation for precision. A battery assigned a specific target could expect to put rounds into a space that field artillery accepted as impossibly tight. The gun was accurate enough that careful survey work and meteorological calculation actually paid off in the way the textbooks said they should, rather than producing groups that scattered the effect across a grid square. Wehrmacht after-action reports noted the unusual accuracy of American heavy fire on specific coordinates, rounds landing where an observer had called them, not where the terrain or the wind had pushed them. The 8-inch went to work in Italy, Normandy, and the Rhineland against the targets it was designed for, the ones that required not just fire, but a specific address. Number 4. The 240mm M1 howitzer. The numbers on the other guns in this list are large. The numbers on the 240mm are different. The 240mm M1 howitzer fired a 360-pound shell. Moving it required breaking it into 2 loads, barrel and carriage, each towed by a separate prime mover. Setting up took the better part of a day. Maximum range was just under 15 miles. When the shell arrived, German engineers' calculations about what concrete could withstand were revised. The 240mm went exclusively against the most hardened targets in Europe: the Gothic Line in Italy, the Rhine crossings, the reinforced positions the Wehrmacht had spent years building into the landscape of Germany itself. It was a specialist called in when the standard toolkit had run out of solutions. The weapon was so large and so difficult to maneuver that it was assigned to specific missions rather than general support. Brought forward, dug in, fired, and withdrawn. German after-action documentation from positions that absorbed 240mm fire described the results in terms that sounded less like damage reports and more like accounts of natural disasters. Number 3. The Fire Direction Center System. The Fire Direction Center, the FDC, was built at Fort Sill in the 1930s around one idea: pre-compute the firing data so the guns don't need to adjust onto the target. The Germans registered targets by observation: careful, accurate, and in fluid combat, slow. American fire direction centers could get accurate massed fire on target within a few minutes of a forward observer's call, where German methods in fast-moving situations required considerably more time and setup. Under the American system, any battery in range could respond to any observer almost immediately. That speed required conditions: pre-survey, pre-registration, coordination up the chain, that a collapsing front rarely gave the Germans. A forward observer, a lieutenant on a hill, a sergeant in a ditch, in one documented case, a soldier who had outlived his officers and was walked through the procedure by a battery commander over the radio, could call in fire from multiple battalions within minutes. If the target was significant enough, the request escalated automatically and pulled in additional batteries. The guns didn't need to be near each other. They didn't need to know each other's positions. They just needed to be in range. Number 2. The VT Fuze. The guns on this list fire projectiles. The VT Fuze changed what those projectiles did when they arrived. The VT Fuze, variable time, guarded as one of the war's most closely held secrets, was a miniaturized radio transmitter fitted into an artillery shell's nose. As the shell approached the ground, the transmitter detected its own reflected signal and detonated the round at an optimized height above the target. The burst pattern drove downward and outward. A German soldier in a foxhole was no longer protected by the earth above him. Before the VT Fuze, achieving an effective airburst required a timed fuse the crew set by hand, sensitive to atmospheric conditions, dependent on an observer to adjust height. The VT Fuze made that calculation automatic and removed the variables that made timed fuses unreliable. Germany had been working on the concept since the early 1930s and concluded it was impossible at practical scale. The miniaturized vacuum tubes that would need to survive being fired from a gun were beyond what German engineers believed achievable. The Americans disagreed. Over 22 million VT fuses were manufactured by war's end. At the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, cleared for land use by Eisenhower under the pressure of the German offensive, they arrived with devastating effect on troops who had felt safe from timed fire in bad weather. German commanders offered a reward for any soldier who recovered an intact specimen. Patton called it the funny fuse and credited it with winning the Bulge. Number 1. Time on target. This is not a weapon. It's what happened when every weapon on this list worked together at the same moment against the same point without warning. Time on target, TOT, was an American artillery technique in which batteries at different distances and angles timed their fire so that every shell arrived at the target simultaneously. Not sequentially, simultaneously. The first second was the worst second, and there was no second before it that announced it was coming. The reason this mattered is physics. An artillery bombardment produces most of its casualties in the first few seconds, before defenders can go prone and find cover. Extended barrages kill fewer people per round because after the first impacts, every soldier still alive is in a hole. TOT compressed the entire lethality of a sustained bombardment into its first moments, and then repeated that moment with every volley. No other army executed TOT at American scale. Germany's system required pre-survey and deliberate coordination. American fire direction centers, with pre-computed data and centralized radio nets, could mass dozens of batteries on a single grid reference and time the rounds to land within 3 seconds of each other. At Hill 187 in November 1944, 20 battalions delivered a 3-minute concentration on a single target. German prisoners who survived TOT missions described the effect in terms that went beyond tactical assessment. The dark reason the German army feared American artillery was not the guns. Germany fielded guns as good as anything the Americans had, and in some calibers better. The gap was in the system around them. The fire direction centers, the forward observer network, the VT fuse, the industrial supply chain, and the doctrine that tied it all together into something that could mask the fires of an entire corps on a single crossroads in under 10 minutes. The Wehrmacht built artillery to fight a war. The Americans built a system to end one. On the receiving end, the difference was not subtle. If you come here for the history underneath the history, the weapons, the doctrine, and the real reasons the war went the way it did, subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll be back.